Welcome to Tinfoil Tuesday, where today we will be discussing how the RMS Titanic never sank. It is historical irony that the most famous ship to ever sail was famous because it sank. But that was the case with the RMS Titanic, the world's largest and most luxurious cruise liner hit an iceberg on its maiden voyage early on the morning of 15th of April 1912. Within 3 hours, it had sunk to the bottom of the ocean, killing 1,500 of the ship's 2,224 passengers and crew. Titanic was one of 3 Olympic-class ocean liners built at the Harland and Wolff shipyards. The Olympic was launched a year before the Titanic, but seemed to share its more famous sister ship's poor luck. Within months of its launch in 1911, it had 2 serious collisions. Some authors have suggested that the damage to the Olympic was more serious than admitted. The already troubled White Star Line was facing a potential financial disaster. Repairs would be ruinously expensive. The Olympic would be swapped with the Titanic and sunk in a staged accident. The Titanic, now disguised as the Olympic, would then carry on in service. The 2 ships were essentially identical and were moored side by side in dry dock. The swap would entail nothing more elaborate than swapping a few nameplates. Photographs taken of the Titanic in dry dock showed with 14 portholes, but by the time of its doomed maiden voyage, it now had 16, just like the Olympic. Again, the windows on the Olympic were somewhat unevenly spaced, but more evenly spaced on the Titanic. And again, by the time of its maiden voyage, the Titanic had acquired unevenly spaced windows, like the Olympic. The damage to the Olympic after its collision with the Hawk lent it a noticeable and permanent 2-degree list to port. The undamaged Titanic had no such list. However, one second-class passenger who survived the sinking reported that the Titanic did, in fact, list to port, stating it was plain she did so, for the skyline and sea on the port side were visible most of the time, and on the starboard, only sky. Coincidence? I think not. I just lost my job in the train yard. Boss asked if I knew how many trains I derailed. I said, I don't know, it's hard to keep track. Thank you for your contribution, Jubba. There is your daily pun timeout. Rumors amongst the crew! Evidence number 3. There was a nationwide coal strike during the launch of the Titanic, leading to thousands of firemen, boiler stokers, and greasers of work. Short of work. Greasers short of work. Yet despite this, the Titanic struggled to find crew, with many men refusing to work on the ship at any price. I wonder why that could be. Maybe it's because they knew that they were gonna sink it intentionally? Rumors were circulating amongst the workers at Harland and Wolff that the ships had been swapped out as part of an insurance scam, and the Titanic was to be sunk. Who called it? This guy did. That's right, bitch. Did foreknowledge of the sinking of the Titanic frighten men off from wanting to work on the ship? Probably. Right, that's what we're talking about. Duh. Despite the immense fanfare and hype that surrounded the Titanic launch, it was only just half full when it left Southampton on its doomed voyage. Did White Star want to minimize the number of passengers because it intended to scuttle the ship? Or had the rumors of the insurance scam spread outside of the shipyards? Several last-minute cancellations from high-profile passengers certainly suggest some kind of foreknowledge. Once again, the rich escaped the sinking. Many of the richest and most prestigious names in early 20th century society were booked onto the Titanic. J.P. Morgan, that fuck, who owned the White Star's parent company, he was gonna travel on it, but guess what? He canceled. Oh, I'm sick, he said. I'm gonna die if I go on this voyage, he said, but not because you're gonna sink it. I swear, it's because I'm sick. It's just because I'm sick, said J.P. Morgan, as he jerked off onto his piles of money and then slapped poor people in the face with them. A New York Times reporter discovered this to be a lie. Morgan was actually seen perfectly well with his mistress in France on the very day the Titanic sunk. There's no possible way he could have ever recovered in that time. Industrialist Henry Clay Frick and his wife, banker Horace J. Harding, and billionaire George Washington Vanderbilt, all connected to Morgan, were amongst several other prominent figures who canceled at the last minute, almost as if they knew. The Californian, also owned by J.P. Morgan, not like a human being, but like a ship called the Californian. He doesn't just own a Californian person. I mean, who knows? Maybe he did. He's fucking J.P. Morgan, who needs fucking bankings and shit, so they're probably all garbage humans. He's sinking a ship full of passengers who did nothing, so, you know, whatever. This is talking about a ship. The SS Californian, also owned by J.P. Morgan, was a large passenger ship that was ultimately blamed for the loss of life on the Titanic. And carrying no passengers, it steamed into the middle of the Atlantic, stopped and waited. Its only cargo was 3,000 woolen blankets and jumpers. Ooh, maybe they were trying to save these people after all. What was the purpose behind this curious maneuver? Was the Californian intended to rescue the Titanic's passengers after deliberate sinking? Edith Russell, a survivor of the sinking, was adamant that Titanic officers assured her the Californian was on its way. But the Californian stopped in the wrong area, 12 miles away from where the Titanic sank. Unable to complete its rescue mission, the Titanic was doomed, and 1,500 passengers and crew perished in one of the worst maritime disasters in modern history. Not so merry of a time now, is it? J.P. Morgan, you fuck. The wreck of the Titanic was discovered by Robert Ballard in 1985. Some evidence from the wreck supports the switch theory. Interesting. The stamp 401, the ID number used for the Titanic at Harland and Wolff, can be seen on the Titanic's propeller. However, some authors have suggested that the Titanic propeller was fitted to the Olympic during its repair following the collision with the Hawk. If true, this would be strong evidence that the vessel on the ocean floor was really the Olympic. What appear to be the letters M and P could also be could also be seen on the side of the wreck. Could it be that the remains of the ship's original X nameplate, Olympic, covered over with the Titanic's as part of a scam? The wreck appears to show some evidence of the gray paint used as an undercoat on the Olympic. The Titanic used black paint for its undercoat. Coincidence? I think not, sir. Insurance scams and maritime fraud were common at the time of Titanic's sinking. While it seems unlikely such a scam could be pulled off today, the lack of media coverage in 1912 makes it more credible. Only one film survives at the Titanic, and it was made by James Cameron. And the photo record is also scant. With the two ships extremely similar, it is argued that only the most eagle-eyed would have ever spotted the swamp. You decide! But wait, did any ship ever even sink at all? That is the next question. Are you a sheep, or will you believe the truth? No ship ever sank, so it doesn't matter if they were swapped.
In 1898, author Morgan Robertson wrote a book called Futility, in which a ship almost exactly like the Titanic was sunk by an iceberg.
Coincidence? I think not. Construction on two
When the
identical
Titanic was
ships.
built, there were two identical ships built at the same time. Why, you might ask? I think the answer is obvious.
To trick people! Titanic is sailing on its maiden voyage through clear waters. One day, the ship is struck
The
by an
Titanic
iceberg.
was made out of metal. Metal is stronger than ice. To prove this theory, I recreated the conditions that caused the Titanic to sink with scale models.
Metal.
What you're about to see
Stronger
may
than
shock
ice.
you. I created an experiment to see which would melt faster at room temperature, a bowl of ice or a bowl of metal. As you can see, the ice on the left completely melted, while the metal on the right barely melted at all.
Coincidence?
Now we know an iceberg didn't sink the Titanic, so a question
I think
remains.
not.
Who did?
Still not convinced. There are only 2 living survivors of the Titanic, and both of them claim to have been babies and too young to remember what happened. How convenient! Even though some of the world's richest and most famous passengers were on the ship, not a single video was made of the Titanic sinking. How convenient! Abraham Lincoln dies the exact same day the Titanic sinks, except 47 years prior. The Titanic had the capacity to carry 3,547 passengers aboard. They both have 47. Coincidence? If you still don't believe the Titanic was a conspiracy, here are some charts and graphs. This graph is taken from the Journal of Metals, Minerals, and Materials. It was made by a real scientist. You can't prove them wrong. Science wins. Here's another graph. An iceberg was blamed for sinking the Titanic. Do they expect us to believe that ice, which is frozen water, is stronger than metal, the stuff they make swords out of? If icebergs are really that tough, then why don't people make boats out of icebergs? Answer me that, Riddler! Here's what they don't want you to know. If you take the word Titanic and you remove the letters tit, and then you add the letters Cosbury, then it spells conspiracy. Coincidence? I think not. Spread the truth. Now we know not only was the Titanic ship with the Olympic, but they didn't even sink that one. It's all a lie. I hope you've enjoyed this very important presentation about the Titanic and are smarter for the experience. Wake up. Wake up, you fucking idiots. Is it a coincidence that you're all here to watch this today at this hour? I think not.